access.
Protecting women's rights in sports bathrooms and prisons. Deep dive podcast show. Let's dive in. In the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're in a we.
Okay, let's dive into a topic that's been sparking, well, what a conversation lately.
Yeah, definitely a hot button issue.
It's about the implications of transgender inclusion policies. You know, on women's rights, we got an article titled "Make It Make Sense: Protecting Women's Rights in Sports, Bathrooms, and Prisons." And I thought, this could be a good one to unpack.
It's a sensitive one for sure, so I think it's important to, approach it carefully with nuance and with respect for everyone's perspective on this.
Totally agree. The author, they're advocating for policies that are based on biological sex, assigned at birth.
Right.
Specifically when it comes to sports, bathrooms, and prisons. So that's what we're going to look at today. Big question is, how do we balance everyone's rights and safety as these policies, continue to kind of evolve?
Definitely a big question. And the article really kind of jumps right in with the whole issue of transgender women in sports.
Right into it.
Yeah. One of their main points is that even with hormone therapy, some transgender women, they might retain some physical advantages.
From being born male, basically.
Exactly.
They actually cite a study that found transgender women, on average, they maintain 12% more muscle mass.
Oh, wow.
Than cisgender women. Even after, get this, 2 years of hormone therapy. That's a pretty significant difference, especially when you're talking about competitive sports.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the article uses that to kind of highlight what they see as potential consequences for cisgender women, right? Like lost scholarships, titles, opportunities.
So is the article basically saying that a level playing field, is impossible? I mean, what are we even aiming for when we talk about fairness in these situations? This isn't we're not playing Monopoly here, the stakes are high.
Absolutely. And that's why it's become such a heated debate. The article brings up real world examples, those state level bans on transgender athletes in certain sports.
Right.
They're framed as attempts to protect fairness, but they also cause, a lot of outrage and legal challenges. It's a tough situation for sure.
For sure. Okay, let's move on to the next area that the article tackles. Transgender individuals in bathrooms.
Yeah, here the main argument is that allowing transgender women into women's restrooms raises safety concerns, particularly for cisgender women. That's kind of their core argument there.
It mentions the potential for exploitation.
Right.
And how difficult it is to actually verify someone's gender identity. Suggesting that it could put cisgender women at risk.
Yeah, and it contrasts this with, those laws that are out there.
Right.
Protecting transgender bathroom access based on gender identity. So it creates this kind of tension.
Between the two.
Yeah.
Between the legal protections and then these perceived safety and privacy concerns of cisgender women.
Right, right.
So the article is kind of saying there's this conflict between these two positions, and how can we address these safety concerns without taking away anyone's rights? That seems to be the question they're posing.
Yeah, exactly. The article doesn't explicitly say here's the solution, here's what we should do, but it definitely highlights those challenges and anxieties around this whole issue.
Definitely. Which brings us to the final area that they cover in the article. Transgender individuals in prisons. I mean, this is where the stakes get even higher, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Here, the article, they really focus on what they perceive as this heightened risk to cisgender women. When you have transgender women housed in women's prisons.
It even cites specific cases,
Yep.
of sexual assault and harassment, emphasizing how vulnerable cisgender women are in that context.
And it acknowledges the legal challenges, surrounding policies that would require transgender inmates to be housed according to their sex assigned at birth. I mean, there are court cases and advocacy groups, fighting for the rights of transgender inmates to be housed in a way that aligns with their gender identity, claiming that it's a matter of safety and dignity.
So you have, this collision of concerns, right? The safety and well-being of cisgender women versus the rights and dignity of transgender women. I mean, how do we even begin to sort of untangle that knot?
Yeah.
What factors should we be like prioritizing when we're developing these policies in such a sensitive situation?
That's the million-dollar question. And I don't think the article pretends to have all the answers, but it definitely raises these important points about the need for like thoughtful consideration and balanced approaches.
Yeah. It kind of like this article is really trying to make us see things from multiple angles. We've got the perspective of, cisgender women who are worried about safety and fairness.
Right.
And then we have the perspective of transgender women who are, fighting for recognition and equal treatment.
Exactly. And the article is suggesting that, like, to find solutions, you really need this nuanced understanding of how complex this issue is. It's not about, picking a side, right? It's about finding ways to address everyone's concerns.
So what we're really looking at here is like a clash of values, rights, and perceptions, all kind of wrapped up in this one, like, intensely debated topic. So where do we go from here?
Well, the article itself, primarily focuses on those concerns raised by the people advocating for these policies based on biological sex. But I think to really grapple with this issue, we need to explore those counter arguments, right? We need to understand the perspectives of transgender individuals and their advocates.
And that's where part 2 of this deep dive comes in.
Exactly. Well, we'll dive into those alternative perspectives.
Oh, perfect.
Explore the legal landscape a bit more, and examine some of the scientific evidence that's often at the heart of these debates.
Sounds like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling like I need to buckle up for what's coming next.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one. Welcome back to our deep dive. So in part 1, we kind of explored some of the concerns in the article, Make It Make Sense, about the potential impact of transgender inclusion on women's rights. But now I think, maybe let's broaden our perspective a bit.
Okay, yeah.
And consider some of those counter arguments, and some alternative viewpoints.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, the article, it definitely like leaned heavily on the idea that biological sex is like immutable.
Right.
And should be like the main thing, the main factor in deciding who gets access to certain spaces and opportunities. But I'm guessing not everyone agrees with that.
Yeah, I mean, critics of that perspective, they often argue that it's too simplistic. It oversimplifies this whole complex reality of gender identity, and kind of dismisses the lived experiences of transgender people. They often point out that gender, it's a social construct. It's not just about biology, and that for a lot of transgender individuals, their very deeply held sense of self that doesn't align with the sex they were assigned at birth.
So it's not just about like chromosomes and physical characteristics.
Yeah, exactly. For many transgender people, their gender identity is a fundamental aspect of who they are, just as real and valid, as someone whose gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth.
Okay, that makes sense. But the article like mainly focuses on these potential risks to cisgender women. What about the other side of the coin, though?
Right.
Like how do these policies impact transgender individuals?
That's a really, really crucial question. And advocates for transgender rights, they argue that excluding transgender people from spaces that align with their gender identity can cause real harm. We're talking about psychological distress, social stigma, even the risk of violence when their identities aren't recognized and respected.
Yeah, that's some heavy stuff. So it's not just a theoretical debate. It's about like real people's, lives and well-being.
Exactly. And that's where, the legal landscape kind of comes in. As we, touched on earlier, a lot of places have laws in place that protect transgender rights, including access to, restrooms and other facilities that are consistent with their gender identity.
But the article, it suggests that those laws sometimes clash with concerns about, the safety and privacy of cisgender women. So how are courts even trying to like balance those competing interests?
Yeah, it's a really complex legal battleground. Opponents of those transgender inclusive laws argue that they prioritize transgender rights, but at the expense of women's safety. While supporters, they counter that these laws are absolutely essential for ensuring equal treatment and dignity for transgender people. And the outcomes of these cases, they have huge implications for how these issues are addressed across, the globe, real.
So it sounds like we've got this legal back and forth, with different interpretations of like what's fair and what equal protection under the law even means. So does science offer any like clarity on these issues?
Well, as with, a lot of these complex social issues, I don't think science offers a simple definitive answer. I mean, the Make It Make Sense article, it really relies heavily on studies that suggest that transgender women, they might retain some physical advantages, even after hormone therapy.
Right. But you mentioned earlier that science doesn't always speak with one voice, right? What are some of the other perspectives out there within, the scientific community?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, some researchers argue that while some physical differences might persist, the extent and the impact of these differences, especially in areas like sports, are still being studied, debated. There's no real clear consensus on how significant these differences are, or whether they actually translate into a meaningful competitive advantage.
So it's not as simple as saying biology equals destiny when it comes to athletic performance.
Exactly. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think it's important to remember that scientific understanding, it's always evolving, right? We have to be cautious about drawing these sweeping conclusions based on, preliminary findings or a limited set of studies.
Okay, so we've got the legal arguments, the scientific complexities, and these different interpretations of what fairness and equality even mean. But what about the human side of all this?
Yeah, that's perhaps the most important part. We need to listen to the voices of transgender individuals, themselves, and understand how these policies actually impact their lives. I mean, many transgender people, they emphasize that being able to access spaces that align with their gender identity is essential for their well-being. And social integration.
So for them, it's not just about convenience. It's about feeling safe and affirmed and respected.
Exactly. Denying them access to these spaces, it can be incredibly isolating and dehumanizing. It can send this message that they're not welcome or accepted, and that can have serious consequences for their mental health and their sense of belonging.
Yeah, this is making me think about the power of language and labels. We've been using terms like cisgender women and transgender women throughout this whole discussion, but did these terms even adequately capture the full range of human experiences and identities?
That's a really thoughtful question, and it gets to the heart of how these debates often get framed in these really overly simplistic ways. I think reducing people to these rigid categories, it can obscure the fact that we're dealing with individuals, individuals with their own unique stories and experiences and identities.
It sounds like we're trying to navigate this really complex landscape with language that might not be fully equipped to capture the nuances.
Right. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of the language we use and to be open to expanding our understanding of gender beyond those traditional binary categories.
So how do we even begin to find solutions that respect everyone's rights and dignity when we're dealing with such a complex web of perspectives and values and concerns?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore in part 3 of this deep dive. We'll look at some of the proposed solutions, and strategies for creating more inclusive spaces and policies that can address the needs of everyone involved.
I'm ready for some potential solutions because this has been pretty heady. Okay, so we've made it to the final part of our deep dive into transgender inclusion and women's rights, and we've explored the anxieties and the arguments and the science and the legal battle. So now for the big question, where do we even go from here?
Right. What are some possible paths forward?
What are the solutions? Yeah,
and the Make It Make Sense article, it raises, a lot of concerns, but it doesn't really offer a whole lot of concrete solutions.
Yeah.
But it does point us towards a key challenge. How do we design these spaces and systems that are inclusive and safe without resorting to these rigid binary classifications that we've been talking about?
Yeah, it feels like we're stuck in this either-or framework,
Right.
Either we protect the rights of transgender individuals or we prioritize the safety and privacy of cisgender women.
Right.
Like, is there even a way to break free from that binary thinking and find solutions that actually work for everyone?
I think there might be. And one approach that's gaining traction is this concept of universal design.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that term before, but remind me what it means exactly.
Yeah, so universal design is about, creating spaces and systems that are accessible to everyone,
Okay.
regardless of their gender identity, their physical abilities, any other characteristics.
So instead of having, separate men's and women's restrooms, which is where a lot of the anxiety seems to be,
Right.
We could have more like single-stall, gender-neutral facilities.
Exactly. That way everyone has access to a private and safe space.
Yeah.
And it kind of eliminates the need for those, potentially uncomfortable or discriminatory encounters that the article kind of highlights as a concern.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty elegant solution on the surface.
Right.
But I mean, does that kind of thinking apply to other areas too, like locker rooms or sports?
Oh, absolutely. We can, reimagine locker rooms, right, with individual private changing stalls alongside more open communal areas. And then for sports, there's been discussion about moving away from strictly male and female categories and maybe creating more mixed gender or even skill-based leagues.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder if there's, ways to apply this universal design concept to those really tough situations like prisons.
Yeah.
Where safety is such a huge concern.
Absolutely. It's definitely a much more complex challenge in that context. But, some experts have suggested that, creating housing units based on individual needs and security assessments, rather than just solely on sex assigned at birth could be a way to kind of increase safety for everyone.
Yeah.
It might require more resources and individualized attention, but it could lead to a more humane and secure environment for all inmates.
Okay, so universal design is, one potential path forward, but it feels like we also need to kind of address the underlying fears and misunderstandings, that fuel so much of this debate.
Right.
Is there a role for education and like open dialogue in creating a more inclusive society?
Absolutely. I mean, education is key to, dispelling those myths,
Right.
breaking down stereotypes and fostering empathy. We need to create spaces where people can, learn about gender identity and transgender experiences and the complexities of these issues
Right.
in a respectful and informed way.
It feels like sometimes people are afraid to even like ask questions or express their concerns because they don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Or be seen as insensitive.
I think that's really understandable, but I think we can't shy away from these conversations. We need to create environments where people feel safe
Right.
to ask questions and challenge assumptions and really listen to each other.
It's almost like we need to relearn how to even talk about these really sensitive issues. We're so used to operating within these binary frameworks and using this loaded language that it's hard to find common ground.
That's a really, really important point. Language matters.
Yeah.
And as we become more aware of the diversity of gender identities and expressions, we need to adapt our language accordingly.
Yeah.
It's about using inclusive language that respects everyone's right to self-identify.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive here, it feels like there's no easy fix, no magic bullet solution, but there are paths forward. It requires a willingness to rethink our assumptions, to embrace the complexity, and to really prioritize empathy and understanding.
I think that's a great way to put it. This isn't about finding the right answer, but it's about engaging in ongoing dialogue and listening to those diverse perspectives and working together to create a society where everyone feels, safe and respected and valued.
Well said. This deep dive has been, well, quite a journey, full of challenging questions and thought-provoking insights. So thank you for joining us and for sharing your curiosity about this complex and really important topic.
Make it make sense. Deep dive podcast show. Let's dive in the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring values strong. stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving